Shayne will be speaking about reaching out to younger groups. Welcome, Shayne.
And to go along with my youthful appeal, I'm going to be reading off my phone because I ran out of ink in our printer this morning. For those of you guys who don't know about the Ethan Allan Institute, we are Vermont's free market think tank. We've been around since 1993 when John McClowry, after running for governor, unsuccessfully founded us. We've been fighting for school choice, health care, lower taxes, and just a generally more accepting business environment in Vermont since then. And you can find out more about us at ethanallan.org. And actually, I mentioned the training earlier. May 17th in Rutland at the Rutland Christian High School. Is that what it is? The training we're having?
Let me look up the location.
Okay. Well, location, not sure yet, but May 17th in Rutland at 9 a.m. we're going to be having another one of our candidate and activist trainings. I want to invite all of you guys to come out. It's a great training. I took part in the last one, as did Bonnie, and very educational, even if you have worked on a campaign before. But I'm here to talk to you about getting young people involved in liberty. And I think that liberty is a very useful idea, and it really surprises me that there aren't more young people here and at various discussions around the state. I'm 20 years old. I'm 2 months away from becoming 21, so I understand firsthand one of the biggest things that young people can strive for more liberty. I was brought up in a military household with a father who, I love him, but he could definitely be described as an authoritarian. When I was 6 years old, my kindergarten teacher said that I told my mom that I had ADHD. My mom, luckily, was an educator herself, so she was smart enough to say, no, he doesn't. I was actually called Hitler my senior year of high school for saying to my high school teacher that I didn't think that healthcare should be a human right for everyone and paid for by people who can pay. And I understand 100% why people would want to fight for liberty, and that's why I'm here. What I don't understand, however, is why the same people that I grew up with that hated having to go home on time, hated having to turn over their cell phone at night, will vote for a president who, in my opinion, is the most authoritarian I've seen ever in our country's history. Under Barack Obama's reign, young people have been under attack like nobody else. The Affordable Care Act, we talked about it a little bit before, but it contains several cost-shifting measures that put most of the cost of the increasing health care costs onto our backs, onto young people's backs. The NSA intrusion has only expanded under President Obama, and for a generation that really didn't want their parents or their girlfriends to go through their cell phones, to now say Uncle Sam is going through our cell phones and getting all this information, I don't understand why they could support that. And despite the promises of change that we heard in 2008, and that unfortunately many of us, myself included, fell for, our military involvements abroad have increased and shifted, not been pared back, we're not bringing the troops home, we are moving them around to different areas and continuing the same policy abroad. What I don't understand is why the generation that gave birth to Google and the iPhone is supporting these policies that are really going to just rob us of the freedom that we yearn for. Let's talk about a number here. $56,000. What does that mean to any of you guys?
How much debt baby woman?
Well, you saw right to the end of that. I was going to say, thank you. I could pay off college. I could finish my college if I had $56,000. I could buy a new car. I could put a down payment on a house. I know there are probably some of you who have had children that you would love to save for college for and raise for 18 years. $56,000 is a significant chunk of money, but unfortunately, I already have to spend that on something else at some point in the future. Some of you might actually escape having to spend that money, which you guys are lucky, but as soon as we start paying down that debt, we're talking $56,000 for every American citizen, from the oldest to the youngest among us. That's wage slavery. And the fact that that's not even the top of it yet. We haven't even stopped growing that budget yet. We are still adding to that deficit, and by 2020, we are projected to be at $22 trillion in debt. That's terrifying to me. And that's only the reported debt. We haven't even taken into account all the unfunded pension liabilities. And I'm sure that Wendy can tell you much better than I can about all of those numbers because she's dealt with it on a municipal level. But the estimates of that run up to $262 trillion. That's basically that there is no way that we can get out from under that without instituting upwards of a 70% tax rate on everyone, on all income, on all money that comes into you. And why are you going to go to work if more than 2/3 of your money is being taken away? Why are you going to start a business? Why are you going to do anything if 2/3 of your product is taken away from you at the end of the day? I really don't understand why my generation doesn't love liberty. Talked about the NSA stuff already. They have actually been using that information to target American citizens for arrest. They have been taking the information that, we've all probably heard about the fusion centers as well. They take that information, bring it from this national organization that is supposed to be in place to protect us from international terrorism, and bring it down so that local law enforcement agencies can use that against we the people. I understand if you've got nothing to hide, or if there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to worry about. But that's not, Andy came down here shaking his head. That's not America. We're a country that is based, it's not in the Constitution, and I really wish that the founders had thought of this, but privacy was one of the most important things to them. Being able to say, no, I don't want people coming into my home, and quartering is one thing. Saying, no, I don't want people to be able to come into my home is one thing. But saying, no, I don't want people to be able to read my mail. I don't want people to be able to read my emails just because it is moving on this network that is online. That doesn't make any sense, and that is not an American concept. Last year, the government shutdown kind of showed us firsthand what lengths the federal government is willing to go to remain in control. Even though, arguably, most of the stuff that they were trying to shut down didn't require any shutdown, they were sending armed agents to various open-air memorials. They were blocking off World War II veterans from being able to access their memorial. They were sending tourists away from Mount Rushmore. They coned off a few parking spots at privately owned Mount Vernon. The idea that that represents a government shutdown in any way is laughable. But then, over the past couple of weeks, we had another example of what the federal government is willing to do in the Clive and Bundy stand-up. I know there's obviously there'll be some recent comments coming out from Clive and Bundy we don't necessarily want to stand by those. But the idea that the federal government can come in to a person that has been on this land, his family has been there for over a century, they were promised the ability to use this land by the federal government in order to move them out there, and for the federal government to send in armed agents, helicopters, and really in what I saw, a military invasion into Nevada. That's not America. That's not America. And that's not the type of government that I want to live under. What they're showing isn't necessarily that we can't trust them, because everyone in this room, we already knew that you can't really trust them. But what they're showing is that they don't trust us. They don't want us to have the ability to own guns because they think we're going to use those guns to hurt other people. They don't want us to be able to pick our own health care because they worry that we're going to pick our own and leave everyone else to die. They don't want us to be able to choose where we go to school because they worry that the richest among us are going to leave all the poor and the whites are going to leave the black. They don't trust us. They simply don't trust us to make decisions that are in the best interest of ourselves and everyone else. So, yeah, I really don't think that my generation thinks any differently than a lot of us when it comes to, we didn't want to have curfews when we were younger because we wanted our parents to trust us, that we were going to be home, and we didn't want our parents to go through our cell phones because we wanted them to trust us. to have a government that says we don't trust you by default is inherently un-American. And I think, honestly, the easiest way to reach out to young people is to ask them, do you want a government like that? Because 9 out of 10 times they're going to say no. And then go even further and say, do you want that government that sends in helicopters, snipers, and armed federal agents to take some guy's cattle? Do you want that government telling you how to get health care, telling you what it has to cover, telling you when and where you can actually get access to that health care? I don't think I do. I know most people I talk to don't. Do you want that government saying, you have to go to school at this school because you live in this area? Or do you want to be able to say, well, you know, I want to go to this school because this school has the programs that I want. This school is closer. I had a friend, actually, who I grew up in St. Albans City, and in St. Albans there are 2 different elementary schools, the city and the town school. Town school, oddly enough, is in the city, and I had a friend who lived across the road from town school and had to go to city school because if he wanted to go to town school, he would have had to pay tuition to town school on top of the property tax. And, you know, of course, anyone who goes to a private school already has to do that, but now they're trying to do away with the tuition system altogether so that anybody who does not go to a public school has to pay their property taxes and whatever tuition. Why would anyone go to a private school then? You know, obviously the richest among us are still going to go because they can afford it, but that's the beauty of school choice, is that it opens up access to the great education that the richest among us can afford to everyone. And Bonnie talked about vouchers for insurance. That's another great idea. By saying, you know, you can have access to top-tier insurance, we're just going to make that available to you through a voucher rather than saying, this is what we have, take it or get out of the state, is basically what they're saying. So I really think that on these issues, we can reach out to young people. I think no discussion of youth issues is complete without talking about drug policy, obviously. And as Bonnie said, the governor's address gives us a very good starting point to go from in that debate. We have Ibogaine is one area, but we're already making movements towards full legalization in the state of Vermont. And whether you think that people should smoke pot or not, whether you think that people should be able to use drugs or not, the idea that we should be throwing people in prison for making a decision with their own body is not one that my generation would support. And I don't know if you can find a single young person that smokes pot or not that would want to go into another person's house and say, you can't do that with your own body, now come with me, I'm going to send you to jail. But when we go through government, when we have a government that does that for us, for some reason, people are okay with that. That doesn't make sense to me, and that really doesn't make sense to many people in my generation. But lastly, we talked about the foreign wars a little bit. We don't want those coming home. Cliven Bundy and his supporters were called domestic terrorists by the Senate Majority Leader. And I don't know about you, but I really think calling someone a domestic terrorist is a very serious claim. And if it's not backed up by some hard evidence, or, I kind of expected some 1984 style stuff where they just send more people in to take them out after. But that is something that the Senate Majority Leader should not be saying.
Isn't the term for him, wouldn't that be a scofflaw? I think would be the correct term.
He is the scofflaw, and it should be said, legally, he has no leg to stand on.
I've heard the homesteading story may not be what we thought it was either.
If we read, the federal law as it is written, then Cliven Bundy is wrong and he's in the wrong. But the federal government owns 85% of the land in Nevada. Is that, we talk about states' rights a lot. Well, is that states' rights? Is owning 12%, or 88 rather is the number. Is only 12% of your land in your state having sovereignty? So even if even if the federal government is right, even if they do have complete ownership of that land, do we really think that the federal government should have a controlling share of all of this land, especially when it's people like Harry Reid that are in power, and there's some backstory there that I'm sure a lot of us know about with solar panels, but
There were also actually state officials who were trying to make the move to take some of that land back from Nevada, so you can't just say it's one crackpot. There were state officials who were trying to get that land under their control too.
Right.
Not that I'm defending, not that I think this is a cause we should ally ourselves with, but.
Right. Well, and actually one of the sheriffs in that area was on the side of Bundy and the supporters.
But it's very important to save the purpose.
Well, yes, of course. But when we're testing our nuclear weapons in that area, it's not that important to save the tourists then. But
BLM ran over a den during the raid. They have a picture of a
I
raid.
did not know that.
Yes, there's a turtle den
Wow.
with tire tracks through it, and you can see the tunnel exposed.
Yeah, well, my point for that was young people didn't want the wars abroad, and we certainly don't want the wars at home. We really, the idea that the Senate Majority Leader, someone in control of one of the strings of government, can say this person is a domestic, an entire group of people rather, are domestic terrorists, and have nothing to back that up, and just let that fly, let that sit there. That is terrifying to me. And combined with the fact that we are going to have no choice about our health care, that we already really have no choice about our education, and that we're going to be expected to pay for all of this in massive tax rates in the future, I don't understand why any young person would continue to vote for the status quo.
I think it's totally perception versus reality. I mean, I know lots of people under 25 who are convinced Obama wants to legalize marijuana, despite all the crackdowns in California and New Mexico. And I think they have this vision of him, and no matter how many facts you put in front of them, they don't want to believe it, and so they don't. He's a rock star, and they feel good because they voted for him or supported him, versus you can point out, pretty much daily the hypocrisy. I mean, there's a website that had the 365 top lies of the Obama administration, and they posted one every day. And it said that was just the top that we picked. So, I mean, I think you can. I've heard lots of things that Generation Y and the millennials trust is a huge, like major defining issue for them. They can't trust them. Hypocrisy is something that just is a really make or break for them. And I think for those of us who want to sort of unbuckle this trust in government, that seems to me, especially for the younger people, that's the wedge. If you can expose, like, okay, you would disagree with this, you disagree with this, you disagree with this, then why'd you vote for this guy who's for all this and wants more of it? And I think there's going to be some cognitive dissonance for a while, but, I mean, they have $1 billion, at least, propaganda machine programming people for this. And so how do we have to counter that somehow?
We're not going to do it with money. We're not going to build our own $1 billion. Before we go over there, I just want to, you talked about California and New Mexico being the states that were really cracked down on. There were some other states that also had medical marijuana. One that I'm thinking of in particular, Colorado, had a medical marijuana program in place before they fully legalized. But I think that it's very telling that the targeted, the enforcement of the federal law was in California and New Mexico. Neither of those are really swing states. Colorado, on the other hand, is very important. If a Democrat doesn't win Colorado, they don't win the election. So he was very careful about not enforcing the law in Colorado because it could piss off some of his supporters. But when it comes to California and New Mexico, where he doesn't really stand to lose that much on this one issue, it's fine to enforce it there because he's going to win those states in a landslide anyways. But you had a question over there?
Well, I was just going to say, how do you compete with a media machine? They're not willing to vet anybody that they like, and they're willing to vet everybody that they don't like. And you brought all these points, and they're all totally valid, but everybody's been buying these points for the last 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, or whatever. And they go to the media and say, look, the media says my guy can do no wrong. Or it says this guy is the Antichrist. Hence, I believe that. Where you go and say, no, this is not the case, this is not the case. You're talking about re-educating 200
I don't think it's going to happen easily on a national level. I voted for Gary Johnson in the last election because I support everything he says, but even if he runs again, his chances are slim. And, we all know that. The thing we can do, every single one of us, is do things on a local level. We don't need $1 billion political machine to do things, to go talk to our neighbors. We don't need any media support to write letters to the editor. And honestly, I see all the time, the type of people that go into teaching, the type of people that go into journalism, they're not our people. And that's a problem. We need more teachers that are willing to stand up in kindergarten. And, obviously it doesn't have to be a political message, but if you can instill in someone the values that are important to instill in a free society, those values are going to go with them throughout their entire life. And if they have someone that they can look up to from a young age saying, this is the way you should live your life, that's going to stick with them. And I mean, it's not going to be something that we can win next year. It's not going to be something that's going to happen quickly, but it's got to be a groundswell. It has to start at the bottom, and we have to work our way up because we don't have access to the national media. We barely have access to the state media. We really have to convince our neighbors and our friends to support our ideas and then go from there.
Coming from above, sometimes we do get lucky, and I just want to point out two specific moments in the last year that drove a wedge. Not enough to make it a tipping point to totally tip the balance, but enough to drive a noticeable wedge was Rand Paul's droning filibuster. That peeled away a lot of the younger voters from Obama because they totally identified with that. There's a lot of criticism about Rand from libertarians. He's not perfectly libertarian, but he improves the GOP. And he did a major thing with that drone filibuster.
And he forced President Obama to take a position, which he hadn't done before. He hadn't publicly said, this is how I feel on it. He forced President Obama to put in writing, this is how I feel about it. And that I think is a huge issue.
Some of the other less dramatic moments would be the reveal of Obamacare and the disappointment.
Oh, yeah.
And earlier on, when people thought he was going to end the war and legalize drugs, and he didn't. Now, I would still like to hope he'll reschedule in the last 2 months of his term, but
pardon every drug offender.
they're just pardoning some, and it's totally inadequate.
To be fair about that, though, like when you point out to somebody that said, all right, casualties in Afghanistan are double what they were in Iraq, they just stare at you like, now it's like, oh,
That's so far away.
That's, you can just listen, and you don't hear anything on the news about it. It is a huge uphill battle. I mean, honestly, if you're getting your news from CBS, NBC, CNN, you're fighting that every day.
Yeah, I mean, it is an uphill battle, and I think making it real for people is a very important thing. One issue that's actually going on right now is under the current property or the miscellaneous tax bill that's working its way through the House right now. Property tax, there's currently an exemption for the fraternity and sorority houses on UVM. Property tax would be instilled on those fraternities and sororities, which obviously can't pay them. They're going to have to increase dues or something to be able to, they cannot pay that money. So that's a perfect, we should be going down to those, I mean, I know a lot of us are boycotting Burlington, I support that 100%, but we need to be going down there and telling those people, look, they want to tax you for living in what amounts to a college dorm. And that's not right. No young person is going to stand by that. And that's the Democratic supermajority that's in power right now. It's not any libertarians that are doing that. Any libertarian in there would put a stop to that pretty quick, I'm sure. But thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate the invitation to come speak to you. And
any other questions for Shayne? Shayne, thanks.